Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of Daytime Dialogues. I have the profound honor today to introduce everyone once again to one of the great personages in our Jewish community worldwide, Dr. David Pelcovitz. Dr. Pelcovitz is one of those people that everybody turns to when we need advice at difficult times, not only because of his expertise in dealing with crisis, expertise in mental health, but also because of his unique combination of the Jewish value that comes from generations of learning within the Pelcovitz family, and that combination together with the science that he is such an expert on. And so I want to thank Dr. Pelcovitz for his continued guidance, and I also want to thank him for giving us of his time today. Dr. Pelcovitz, thank you for joining us. And let me just kick it off with a very simple question. What are you seeing in our community now from a mental health perspective in terms of our responses to the COVID crisis?
Yes, I mean, look, I think it's like one would expect. It's completely varied. It depends on your level of exposure. So here in New York, there's unfortunately in certain neighborhoods in particular, there's a tremendous amount of unfortunately, not unusual to have to pay, um, 7, 8 shiva calls in a given day
Right.
of older people who have, who've been lost to COVID, and sometimes, younger people. But obviously, if you're living in an area where it doesn't feel quite as real or as direct, there's the dread. And pretty much what we're saying is totally normal reactions to an abnormal situation, almost to the point that I'd worry if you had absolutely no reaction at all. And it ranges from anxiety to depression to a little bit of panic, all mixed with optimism and happiness and simcha. I think that what I'm most impressed with is the level of resilience. I'm seeing the people who, if you would have told them, a couple of months ago that we'd be sitting here today talking about the kind of lifestyle that we have with the pandemic, people would have had a very hard time seeing the resilience and even believing that they could do it. But what I'm seeing probably more often than the panic and sadness is also tremendous amount of optimism. Some people, a chance to get to know their kids in ways that they haven't been able to in the past, chance to get to know grandchildren, and they're lucky enough to be sheltering in place with grandchildren, and a chance to really, if you're lucky enough to have a good solid relationship with parents, with spouses, or with other family members, it's a chance for deepening, which is amazing, which is a real source of simcha.
So why do you feel that our community has that simcha that has come up from nowhere? And for those who are finding that difficult to understand, how do we bring that even more to the fore?
Right. So, in terms of positive psychology and the research on from a psychological standpoint, which dovetails beautifully with the research on a Judaic standpoint, simcha is tied to connection. It's shamoach, where your head is at, al pidrosh. Okay. So it's basically what the research shows in positive psychology. It's any time we're deeply connected to family, friends, and faith, our simcha levels go up, our immune system functioning improves. And anytime we could do that, even if it's during tough times, we could surprisingly have a higher level of simcha. Chazon Ish said it beautifully, and he had gone through very tough times in his life, Chazon Ish. And he said, for he who knows the light of truth, there's no sadness in the world. So when we're connected to something enduring and to the spiritual and mostly about, to the people we care most about, which in some ways the pandemic is giving us some extra time, even though it may not feel that way, and some extra opportunities to have that. And to stick just a drop with the idea of shamoach, it's to the extent that we could. I guess the best way of summarizing that is what the Baal Shem Tov said. You want to know where the person is? See where his or her thoughts are. And if they're a thought of connection, you're guaranteed a high level of resilience, etc. I'm sorry. Let me.
No. I guess my question would be back. Well, what would we do what should we be doing to help people? If you're in place with your family, so you have your children, your spouse, your grandchildren, but there are a lot of people in our community who are by themselves. And what can they do? I understand a community should be reaching out to them also, but what can they do to increase that simcha, that resilience?
Right. Okay. So a lot of that has to do with having the strength to reach out to others. And connection doesn't have to be eye to eye and face to face. It doesn't have to be in person. There's a tremendous amount of connecting that could be done, even during a pandemic. It could be through Zoom, which, by the way, the research shows that when we're on a Zoom call like this, the mirror neurons, you looking at me looking at you, and even if I was seeing everybody on this call all at once, that eye to eye, face to face, and heart to heart, as long as you're focusing and you're not multitasking, it can be a really true and genuine and not fake connection. I know there's been a lot of complaints lately about how fake Zoom feels, but I've had some amazingly meaningful Shiva calls on Zoom, and some really fun interactions with our extended family, celebrating birthday parties, celebrating other events. The grandchildren love it. It's funny. I wish I won't bore you by showing it to you. But just before we got on this call, my daughter sent me something from my 2-year-old grandson, who's a twin, and they're sheltering in place in the mountains, a vacation village in the mountains. And he, I guess, echoing ways I connect to them by, walking around the house and around the neighborhood and sharing with them certain things and certain thoughts on Zoom. He was giving me literally a 10-minute tour of his house, and with this really, I found unbelievably charming kind of connection. And he was all excited about it. And his twin sister, who supervises everything that he does, she was approving of what he was doing. So there are all kinds of forms of connection. And then there's the concept of hope. Hope is incredibly important. I just heard a beautiful talk, which you I'm sure you've heard from Rabbi Dr. David Fox, a psychologist, and Dayan, and professor, both a psychologist and a rabbi. And he was bringing out this beautiful medrash that says, "Hakol b'kivui," that everything needs to be done in tough times with a level of hope. And hope is powerful. Etymologically, the Hebrew word kav, which is embedded in the word tikva, is, I think, a metaphor for the fact that even if you're living alone, and even if you're feeling very lonely, there's still that cord. We're not dangling and twisting in the wind. We have that connection with the spiritual and our relationship with God. We have that connection with the community and with family, and people who just reach out, even if they feel they're not gonna benefit from reaching out. All the research on the psychology of happiness says that this could be amazing. That reaching out, even if you're an introvert and you think it's not going to work, just that connection, especially at times like this, could be an amazing kind of coping strategy.
So what you're suggesting is, if even the person alone, whether it's watching things on Zoom, or even sending an email or texting. Those are the kinds of things we should be encouraging them to do, and we should make sure we're responding.
Yeah, and if we could visit them and with a safe social distance. I don't know what the Illinois guidelines are. I'll just say that here, where unfortunately we've been hit quite badly, people are extremely careful about social distancing. You know, it's people are walking with masks and they're doing social distancing. But if we know that there's somebody living alone, and not just on the other, you know, in general, we'll go and we'll arrange ahead of time to meet them from a safe distance, and just that feels to them that they're not dangling in the wind. My stepmother, Shirley Gross Pelcovitz, is mishpacha in the
Right.
neighborhood. So she's it's amazing because she for the most part is living you know living alone, but there's constant visits to her. People come to her and they talk from a distance. Then they go and there's a musical Havdalah that takes place with loudspeakers from a very far distance. In other words, from porches around their immediate area, like a Karl Bachian Havdalah that Rabbi Dr. Eli that Dr. Eli Shapiro does. It's just amazing the feelings of connection. And she tells me she doesn't feel alone at all. I heard this beautiful thought from I think it was Paul Tillich. Is that how you pronounce the name of that philosopher? He says, and this also I got from David Fox. He says there's a huge difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is painful; it hurts, and that's one of the more painful parts of the pandemic. Okay, especially if we're not feeling connected to anybody. But solitude, he says, is a gift. So to learn, the benefits of solitude, the time for reflection, and deepening our relationships, that's an amazing source of resilience.
It's one of the interesting things that I've had to deal with, and I don't have any answers for, are for the young adults who were planning either to get engaged or have gotten engaged and were planning a wedding, which isn't going to happen the way they imagined it would be. Or they're even, to make it even worse, they're really distant. One is found in Chicago and the other is in New York. Have you had to deal with any of these kinds of relationship issues and how that's working?
Yeah, I've done a number of calls and webinars for people. By the way, one of the cruelest impacts of this pandemic is newly married men and women who get married, but they with whatever very limited way they can get married, often without a minion, whichever way they do it. And then they have to go on lockdown with their in-laws. Okay, so could you imagine living for month after month with your brand new father-in-law and mother-in-law? So we did some support calls for that. I have a daughter living with me who, God willing, is getting married on Labor Day. And she tells me she's part of a group, and she's fine because she's a psychologist who specializes. She's a professor at Cornell. She specializes in helping people with anxiety and with trauma. She's on Zoom calls all day. Okay, but she is part of a group called Brides of COVID, who just talk and give each other support, and it's hard. It's difficult. But I think that with something like that, it's out of your control. I think there are many ways of being able to come up with. I know that I'm sure you've had to deal with this a lot. With the idea that you could have a ceremony, really celebrating it later on, and that you could focus on that. There's something I know that what I'm hearing from a lot of people, that there's something. She was supposed to get married with in a group of 600 of our dearest and closest friends. And now it's very unlikely it will be more than 50 or at best 100. Who knows what's going to be by then. But the reality is that there's also something very nice about the intimacy of that. Maybe being able to get married in our home. There's something I personally love about it, but I understand it's a loss. And the general approach to that kind of loss is give yourself permission to be human, give yourself permission to have the mixed feelings of sadness mixed with happiness. Because when you let in and give yourself that Ishur, right? Ashrei is the highest level of happiness. Ishur is to validate. You give yourself permission to feel this bittersweet sadness, that comes with not being able to have the wedding of your dreams. It's strangely validating, And once you let that in and you don't fight it, and you give yourself that permission, actually what happens is often paradoxically you deal with it better. You deal with it
I'm going to
better.
have to get the addresses, the phone numbers, the Zoom addresses, whatever it is, of the brides of COVID or the other help groups, because I want to pass them along further. Maybe we'll exchange that by email later on.
Happy to share it.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
What do you think are the takeaways when things open up that we should hold on to from this experience?
Okay, I think again, I think that there's amazing potential takeaways here, but while at the same time, this doesn't mean that you don't have the right to feel at times depressed and feel panic. So one takeaway is that we now realize that we're really living on the Gesher Tzar mode. We're living on that narrow bridge, and that's just a reality that we're often not aware of, and we now are able to have hopefully that post-traumatic growth, the ability to grow from facing these kind of challenges. And there's a deeper wisdom, a deeper happiness that could come from that. There's a beautiful thought about, and beautiful research in Jewish thought about, it's always our choice how to deal with the stresses in life. We could either see ourselves as a log floating on the river at the mercy of the current, which is your salvation would say is being in a go-roll place. You're just floating away, and you're helpless and hopeless and passive. Or you could choose to view it as yiyud. This is my destiny, and how am I going to grow from it? And the research shows that to the extent that you're able to shift things to see, okay, how am I going to grow? Maybe I'll appreciate my family more. Maybe I'll appreciate life more. Maybe I'll connect to davening in a different way, or maybe I'll connect to chesed in a different way. It's a rare opportunity to be able to have that kind of introspection. And ultimately, there's the Medrash Tehillim that I probably quote too much, probably to the point of nausea a little bit, but I'll say it again anyway. It's the Medrash Tehillim that says that to the extent that we could view this through the prism of Ilu Nafalti Lokamti. If I never fell down, I never would have been able to get up. Ilu Yashafti Bachoshech Lo Haya Orli. If I never sat in the darkness, I never could have appreciated the light. When we can see it through that prism of post-traumatic growth, it's a game changer. And we may look back on this one day as a phenomenal opportunity. Sure, we'll see it as a bad dream. We also might see it as an incredible chance to deepen the connections to our family, our faith, and our community.
Before we move forward, I just want to remind anyone who's watching that if there are any questions, we'll try to incorporate them. You can just click on the Q&A button and type out the questions. We'll be able to see them. Some of them, hopefully, we'll be able to address. So just to move on to how, all of these great ideas, but how do we get people to really find that strength? I understand inherently that we need to be able to look at the positive, to take the idea of destiny, to try to take control, not be the log floating down the river. But sometimes not everybody has that positive attitude. Recently someone asked me how I was doing, and I said, like I normally do, I said, I'm doing great. And they said, you're the first person to use that phrase, doing great. And the reality is I'm fortunate because I have a lot of different outlets and I have a lot of different responsibilities. And so I can't just sit back. But there are people who just, how do you turn it? How do you just make it happen?
Yeah, yeah. Let me, can I share with you a story? I think it's worth the time because it's one I find personally helpful. Yeah, some people are wired in a way that they're more pessimistic. And by the way, there's some wonderful books, especially by Dr. Seligman, the head of the clinical psychology department and the founder of positive psychology at University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Seligman wrote a book called Learned Optimism, very finely researched book about very practical ways for people who are prone to pessimism to turn to optimism. Let me share you a story, connect to our right hemispheres. There was every Rosh Chodesh, there's a rabbi, prominent rabbi in Yerushalayim, who goes to the entranceway to the Shari Tzedek Hospital. He goes right into the lobby, and he stands there for hours on end, just looking at various signs showing you here's neurology, here's GI, here's cardiology or whatever. And he'll sometimes spend every Rosh Chodesh, he'll be there for 4 or 5 hours. And people didn't want to be disrespectful because he'd just stay there and then he'd walk out and he'd go home. And they saw him like clockwork every Rosh Chodesh. So finally, somebody had the guts to go over to him and say, Rabbi, we see you here every Rosh Chodesh. Can you explain to us what you're doing? So he said the following. He said, it's very easy to be grateful to those who we don't expect much from. People who are making deliveries to us because they're better able to go shopping. The people who help us with a flat tire on the highway. Okay? Very easy to be grateful for the unexpected. But it's the people who we owe the most to. We're Hergel, habituation takes over. It's very hard to stay grateful to them. He said, so what I know that I need to reset my clock once a month. I know that I need to remind myself to be grateful to the people who I owe the most to, be it my parents, my children, my siblings, or whatever. So I'll look first, let's say, at cardiology. And I'll think, how how many people are in cardiology with COVID-related heart problems? You know how many people are recovering from bypass surgery? And I just focus on gratitude for even though I'm an older man, for my well-functioning heart. And then I do the same thing with GI. And I'll say, wow, what a miracle, if even one part of my GI system that should be open is closed or that should be closed is open, I couldn't even last for a minute in front of you. And I do that with everything, and I walk home recharged. Here's the basic recommendation. If we can teach ourselves to focus on what we have instead of on what we don't have, if we could teach ourselves to sort of be grateful even for small things, for a smile, for a well-cooked meal, for a positive interaction with people who we feel close to. And if we could discipline ourselves to count our blessings. The research shows that every Friday night you have a ritual. You count your blessings, 5 things from the week you're grateful for. And you ritualize it, your happiness levels will go up, your sleep will improve, and your immune system will become better. One more thing on resilience is the power of exercise. Okay, exercise is so incredibly important. To go out, to light up the network system of our brain. That's where we daydream and allow our brains to just run wild. That's incredibly important. And with Dr. Tal Ben-Shachar, one of the experts on resilience in the time of COVID, former Harvard professor who's now at IDC in Israel, he says it beautifully. He says, when you exercise, the kind of endorphins that are released are the best antidepressant, the best anti-anxiety kind of process around. But he says to not exercise is an active depressant. And it doesn't have to be a fancy exercise. If you're stuck in a one-room apartment and all you could do is download some ways of doing strength exercises or running in place, or even if it's just to go out around the block, okay, and just walk and admire the beautiful spring weather is an active antidepressant, but to not do it is an active depressant. So all of those are various ingredients.
So exercise, practice gratitude.
Practice gratitude and permission to be a human being, permission to be imperfect, and permission to say to yourself, any feeling I have now is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And that's really what tikva is. Tikva is all about, coping in a way that you focus on what you have instead of on what you don't have.
One last question, and changing gears a bit, but it came from the audience, and that is just in terms of connections, going back to that topic, but connections in this case of young men and young women meeting each other. Is a relationship that starts virtually a meaningful relationship?
Sure, it can be. It can be, because there could be, I know it's challenging, and if I could just, refer you all to a wonderful session that Why You Connects did. So Why You Connects, this organization that tries to foster shidduchim in the modern Orthodox world. So Why You Connects had a whole webinar with both Dr. Efrat Sobolovsky, the head of Why You Connects, who's been really very expert in this area, and with various physicians and rabbanim as experts from their point of view, and just giving very practical. By the way, Rabbi Dr. Blatt was on the call, as well as his wife, who's one of the leaders of Why You Connects. And they talked about ways of connecting, and they have on that, if you find that link, you'll find very practical kinds of ways of connecting in a way that's totally okay. Rabbi Dr. Blatt does not at all like the idea of taking the chance of going on an old-fashioned date, even if it's from a social distance. Maybe that's going to change as we go into later phases. But it's an amazing opportunity, to be able to deepen a connection in a way that may be even better than dating like they did in the old country.
Well, our time is coming to an end. I just wanted to thank you again, Dr. Pelcovitz. I know that there are going to be many other opportunities to hear you and to hear your advice, but I hope that this brief session that we had was also helpful to the people who were listening in and the people who will listen in. And Dr. Pelcovitz, you are one of our guiding lights in our community. I appreciate every time that I'm able to interact with you, and today is not an exception. Please, God, send our best to your wife, to your family. Everyone should stay healthy, and you should continue to inspire us as we try to find the strength to be positive, resilient, and make it through and looking forward with hope to the next step. Thank you so much today.
Thank you. And I feel the same about you. I've never said no, ever, to Rabbi Matenki. Because of how much I admire him.
Well, I appreciate it. I should have ended the recording already before that, but I thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you.